Hi everyone, my name's Alex. I'm a member here at South Park Commons. I'd like to welcome you all to this chat with Manik Gupta. Manik is the Chief Product Officer at Uber. I figured I'd give you a little bit of background on him, although you also probably don't need it, but let's do it anyway. Manik previously ran Uber's Marketplace and Maps products teams, where he was responsible for creating best-in-class mapping solutions and marketplace technologies. Before that, he worked on Google Maps for 7 years, where he launched Google Maps in India, managed MapMaker, and ultimately led the creation and curation of all maps and business data for the company. So that's not a small thing. Manik is also a founder. He started BuyItTogether.com, which was an early precursor to Groupon right out of college. And that product was ultimately sold to Kotek, which is a Norwegian e-commerce company. So now you guys have the background on our speaker. But before we'd like to begin, I'd also like to introduce you to the community as a whole. South Park Commons is a collective of technologists, tinkers, and entrepreneurs who come together to freely learn, to explore new ideas, and to help each other launch our next ventures. Sorry, Ruchi usually gives that spiel a little better than I do. And so if you'd like to learn more about the community, I'd really encourage you to either speak to me after the event or to another member. I'd say probably looking at the audience here, maybe 2/3 are members. So there's a solid enough chance that the person you're sitting next to is in fact a member. So I want to keep this pretty casual. That's kind of the point of the fireside chats here. I have a bunch of questions prepared, but I also, if you feel compelled, if there's a topic that we're speaking on that you find particularly interesting and that you have an interest in, stick up your hand and we might call on you to ask a question at any point. But then we also might open up the floor for discussion later in the talk. So, all of that being said, Manik, welcome to South Park Commons. That's quite a bit of intro. So I touched on your background when introducing you, and I know those things don't really tell the full story about who you are and how you got to where you are. So you started the company in the 90s. You went on to work at HP, at Google, and Uber. I just want to know what do you think you've done right, what you wish you'd done differently, and then the general themes that you've encountered in a 20-year plus career in tech.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, folks. Really nice to meet all of you. And it's an interesting setup here, and I look forward to the discussion. Don't give me hard questions, please. I'll answer only the easy ones. No, I'm just kidding. We can discuss. I'm here to share my perspectives, whatever I've learned over the years. So I think, look, from a couple of themes, right? So what I have always been very passionate about is really solving a real world problem, right? And from the first startup that I started right out of college was exactly about that. It was, I had this dream that I can create efficiency in the market by pooling demand of customers and giving them volume discounts. And this was back in Singapore. It was a very small market, so I spent a lot of time in Singapore growing up in Asia. And I set that up, and I really wanted to bring efficiency and pass the consumer, provide a lot of discounts to customers and so on. And I learned that building a real world business is extremely hard, right? As opposed to a digital business. Like if you build an e-commerce business or you build a business where you have to really organize the real world around you and then make sure that you're able to provide that to the users, it's an extremely hard business to do because there's an operational element to it. Lots of things can go wrong. Whatever you can imagine can go wrong, will go wrong, and even more, right? So we failed miserably as a startup. We were not able to really get too much of a market, even though we had a successful acquisition and so on. But the biggest issue for me at that time was the cost of delivery was the one that killed us, right? And the reason why I say that is you can imagine, I don't know how many folks know this, but the number one selling product on my website at that time was a Palm Pilot. So I'm dating myself, I know, right? So it was a Palm Pilot, and we used to sell those 5 Palm Pilots for a $20 discount per Palm Pilot. That was amazing. But then each of those packages had to be sent to the customer's house, and the cost of delivery at that time was very high, right? So as you think about unit economics and so on in a real world business, it's very hard. So that's the first sort of meta level lesson that I've learned, which I've carried very deeply with me over the years. In terms of other themes, so I also feel that a lot of us have an opportunity from time to time, whether we are working in a company or starting a new company, the companies that end up becoming successful, in my mind at least, are companies that are able to change consumer behavior. That is a very hard thing to do as well, right? Because a lot of people have habits, they are set in their habits and so on. But if you can change consumer behavior, then you actually not go after an existing market, you create a market, right? And I think that is, I've had the opportunity, honestly, to be a part of multiple businesses like that. So for instance, when we were when I was building Google Maps in India, it was interesting because my parents who are also from India, when I was staying there, my dad used to always tell me, like, why would anybody use Google Maps in India? Like, everywhere you go, there are people, you can just ask them for directions, right? And it was really interesting. The insight that we had at that time was there are a lot of people within India and other emerging markets who were actually immigrants, people who were moving from one city to another city, and they didn't have the social network or the social support system to be able to ask other people for where to buy groceries or where to go and how to go there and so on. So when we started building Google Maps, it was really interesting to see how consumer behavior changed. People started using it. People started using it for navigation, even though the network bandwidth was really poor. The phones were not that great. So that's where I saw how powerful you can actually build a product, get product market fit, and then start changing the consumer behavior. And it amazes me today that when I visit a lot of these markets, I get into an Uber and the driver is using Google Maps and two of my worlds collide, right? So it's fascinating for me to see that because this has now enabled a different set of consumers to come online and do different things, right? So that's the second theme I would say that has been very interesting for me. And the third one I would say is I also believe that you gotta build products that if you can come up with a way in which the more your user uses the product, the better it gets for that user, you just have an incredible flywheel effect. A lot of people say this is about personalization. It is about personalization, but it's a lot more, right? So if I'm sure that if you pick up your phone right now and you choose the favorite product that you use on a regular basis, you kind of feel that the product knows you, right? Sometimes it can be spooky too, I get that, right? But the product knows you, it's very deeply personalized, it has all your sort of shortcuts in there and so on, it's very convenient to use, it solves a pain point that you have. So companies that have been successful in building products that have hundreds of millions and billions of users are companies that have figured out a way to make the product work that much better for you depending on how much you use it, right? So I think those are some of the top level themes. I know I'm not answering your question exactly, but like those are the top level themes that I feel that have been always in the back of my mind as I make decisions or as I think about how to build product. That's what is constantly in the back.
Yeah, for sure. You actually touched on quite a bit there, and I think actually kind of parlays nicely into something else that I wanted to talk about, and maybe we'll just go there right now, which is the other night I was on the phone with my mom asking her, like, what should I ask about? And I think she's, she, being of an older generation than I am, like one of her top concerns with Uber is she's not really sure about like the safety and the trust aspects. And I think that kind of touches on when you create a new market, there's like entirely new categories of concerns there that maybe like just people weren't considering before, and you have to educate consumers on what even to expect in the new market. So how, as Uber's Chief Product Officer, do you view that challenge and moving into like not only new markets but like new demographics entirely for your product?
Absolutely, I think that's a great question. So let me touch on safety first, and then I can give you the more sort of generic framework to think about it. So safety for Uber has been a number one company priority for at least the last couple of years, if not more. We have always been investing deeply in technology to make our rides safe. So just to give you folks some context, so we do roughly 16 million trips a day globally. We are in about 650 cities around the world in almost 60 countries. And when you have that level of a footprint, bad things will definitely happen. It's, like I said, it's a real world business, right? So things can go wrong and they will go wrong. What we do on our side is we do a ton of work to make sure that we provide a lot of controls to riders and drivers. And by the way, when we talk about safety, it's not just about the riders, it's also about the drivers, right? Especially in markets where we accept cash as a payment. Can you imagine that a driver who has done 10 trips, he or she is carrying a lot of cash around, and then a rider could get into a car and have a physical altercation with the driver. So we do a lot of work to make sure that we provide the right tools. So some of the examples are, earlier, in fact, middle of last year, we launched a safety toolkit for the rider. So if you use Uber, there is a safety shield in the Uber app, and you press on it, you basically get all the information that is required in case of an emergency. So, and in some markets in the US, some cities in the US, you even are able to contact 911 if something goes wrong, and your location is automatically shared with the 911 emergency center. So you don't even have to, tell them where you are and things like that. Everything is automated. So we are investing hugely in safety, and this is a massive priority for us in terms of how to make our rides the safest and most reliable. And then I think, as we think about how to meet these emerging needs, as you were talking about, I think we do a bunch of things. So part of it is we have a fantastic user research team. I think that's an investment that we made early on, and I'm very, very grateful that we have that team. That team is built of many people who are really good at understanding user behavior through interviews, through focus groups, and so on. So keep in mind, like I said, we have so many different markets that we launch in, and each market is a little bit different. So we are one of the most global companies in that space. So our user research team goes out, and then they talk to a lot of people and understand, not about asking them about exactly how they will use the product, but asking them and trying to understand their needs. And based on those needs, then they come up with insights. Those insights can then drive our product development. So that's one way we do it. The second way we do this is experimentation. We have thousands of experiments running all the time. We do a lot of A/B testing in our app. We do a lot of marketplace testing around pricing, around the way we match riders and drivers. For instance, in the Eats, we have an Eats business as well, which is our food delivery business. We do a lot of testing around ranking of restaurants and stuff like that. So we do a bunch of that to get user signal, and that is how we kind of get an early signal, if you will, of what the emergent user needs are, and then we can solve for them. So that's sort of a combination of what we do.
That's great. And again, it parlays nicely into another topic that I want to touch on, which is, Uber, when it started, was like a relatively simple concept. I think we all understand, like, Uber has basically become like a Kleenex style word right now. But the company's gotten quite a bit bigger. And so I'd like to know, how do you position Uber as a product, as a company? And in your role as Chief Product Officer, obviously, you're responsible for everything that is the Uber product. And so I think it would be interesting to hear from you directly how you view the company evolving.
Yeah. So the way I think about this is Uber is essentially a platform. And think of us as like the Amazon of transportation and local commerce, right? So let me parse that, right? So we want to be the one-stop shop that users use when they want to go from point A to point B. And I think the difference between us and a lot of other companies that have a similar mission is, not only do we provide you the information, we actually get you there, right? So to give you some examples, like for instance, if you want to go from here to here to Embarcadero or so on, somewhere nearby, and it's rush hours, you don't want to really get into a car and go there. But so we can give you a bike or a scooter, right? So we have our service, which is available in the app, and you can do that. At the same time, in cities like Denver and now London, we have launched the ability for people to choose a transit trip within the Uber app. So you open the Uber app, you enter your destination, and we'll tell you which train to take. And that's not even on our network, right? We are not running trains, right? So it's not on our network, but we just want to solve that customer need by making sure that we provide the best possible option. And soon we are going to be launching, we've already publicly announced this, but if you were to go to New York and you are at JFK and you want to go to Manhattan, you can now take a helicopter. And that whole thing is integrated, right? So you get picked up at the airport in a car, you get into the helicopter, it's a 7-minute ride, and I haven't done it yet, but a lot of my colleagues have done it, right? I'm looking forward to doing it next time I'm there. And then there's a car waiting for you when you get to the heliport, to the other side, and then it takes you to your destination. And the amazing thing is, you don't have to book 3 trips. It's all integrated. It's all coordinated, it all just works, right? And we still have work to do, but it works, right? Mostly, right? So my point is that we are really going all out, and we have a subsidiary, which is the Uber Air subsidiary, which is working on actually flying cars, or planes that are electric planes that can take you from point A to point B. And we recently did a summit in DC about this, which was extremely well received. And our goal is, like I said, just to keep going and build that entire spectrum of transportation options, so that anybody in the world, literally anybody in the world, can go from point A to point B and they can decide based on the convenience and the price and the reliability, and they can make those trade-offs for themselves. So that's one part. And on the local commerce and in terms of how we think about that is we have our Eats business, which is essentially restaurant, food delivery from restaurants. We have 220,000 restaurants around the world that we deliver from, right? And 50% of users who come to Eats and who sign up with Eats are new to Uber, right? So that kind of gives you the perspective in terms of how we think about broadly. We are getting into we are doing food delivery. We also have now a freight business, which essentially allows people to be able to book trucks to be able to send a lot of cargo from point A to point B using trucks as well. So the mission and the goal is very broad, but essentially if you really boil it down to, it's really about we want to be the best in the world to move X from A to B, right? That X can be food, it can be packages in future. A to B is really point A to point B, and that's what we want to do. So we are building a ton of capability, whether it's operational capability, technological capability, product expertise, all our data, all our network, all our insights to serve that.
Cool, yeah. And so I think one of the things you brought up there was the word platform, right? And I think for the people in this audience, the companies that we think of when we hear platform are probably companies like Apple, like Google, and those are not coincidentally, those are the companies that currently control mapping and control like where people have location services for individuals, I suppose. And so to what extent can Uber exist collaboratively with them? To what extent do you see yourselves as competitors? And how do you think of that as a product officer?
No, absolutely. So, it's absolutely true. I think there are companies, Google especially has built a pretty good stack for mapping and geospatial services. And we are a big partner with them. So in fact, we are a customer. We buy a lot of Google services to power our app because they are really good at what they do. At the same time, one of the things that's important and people probably don't realize is that our mapping needs as Uber are a little bit different than a lot of services that are fully available from other vendors. So I'll give you a particular example. You look at the simple problem of pickup and drop off, right? So you order an Uber, right? And the first question is, where do you get picked up, right? Addresses don't really make sense in a lot of these urban areas because each address can actually have 3 different pickup points, right? It could be on this road, it could be on the intersection, and so on. And a lot of those pickup points are not real addresses in the real world, right? They are just virtual addresses, if you will. So when we look at solving the pickup and drop off problem, for us, we have to go one level deeper, right? Where we have, not only do we need to understand the topology of how the world is and where each thing is, and this is what we can get from other providers, including Google and so on, but we kind of have to layer another thing on top of it, a layer of smarts on top of it to really provide the user experience. So we are continuing to invest tremendously in the way we think about the pickup and drop off problem, even the routing, so point A to point B. We generate our own routes, so we have our algorithms that not only look at the shortest time, shortest distance, we do a bunch of that algorithm. And if folks have taken express spool, right, which is where you have to walk and wait and walk a little bit, a lot of that computation is done by us ourselves because that's the only way we can make that enabled, right? So to answer your question, we are a customer of Google's. We have a great partnership with them. My old team, I know them really well. We work very closely. At the same time, we have to make sure that we are investing on top of that stack to really meet our customer needs.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and actually, this is probably a good time. We're about halfway through the chat, and so I figure we can open it up for a few questions from the audience if we have the mic. And wow, we have quite a few questions. So we're not wanting for questions. Just wait for the mic to actually get passed around. Yeah, it's like a personal recorder. Up front.
Especially when the product doesn't exist and you do user research and people say that, oh, I don't know if I would use it. Your father says that, why does anyone need this? Then how do consumer companies think of intuition and just power throughing negative user feedback?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So the way I think about this is, you have to have some insights. And if you're a product person or you're an engineer or you're a data scientist or whatever, you're in this space, you have some insight in terms of either solving your own personal pain point, which is usually a good starting point, or you talk to your friends or you talk to people around you. You kind of have that instinct that there is a problem that I want to solve. And I think what has happened over time now, if you look at the acceleration in terms of how fast consumer companies are able to go find product market fit, is because there are a tremendous set of experimental frameworks that are available. So the cost of developing something and testing it has gone down dramatically. Right? I was reviewing something yesterday where even in a mobile app now, you can change the entire flow and the UI elements of the mobile app without even shipping much code, right? And you can do that from a testing perspective. So you have instincts, you try it out, you just build it, you launch it, you figure this out, you see what's working, what's not working, and you will kind of know when it's working when you start seeing the virality loops kind of developing. So that's how I think a lot of consumer companies are able to iterate and get into product market fit.
So I have two questions that are related. Why Uber Eats? Like, if it seems that unit economics don't make sense there, is that because of growth? And like, self-driving cars are coming, right? Like in the next 10 years, probably we'll have self-driving cars. And it seems that Uber is divesting from that. Like, what's the strategy there? Like, I mean, I love Uber, and I think like matching riders or matching cars and people will keep happening, right? But with self-driving cars, you won't have drivers.
Yep. Yeah. So on Uber Eats, I think you kind of answered this already. We are in hyper growth phase, so we are investing to grow. At the same time, there are many markets where a lot of the unit economics make a lot of sense, and there is a ton of opportunity. I mean, people have to eat 3 times a day, right? And we are seeing significant re-engagement, a lot of new users coming into Uber. Riders are now becoming eaters, so we have started building that viewpoint, right? Which is, how do we have one view of the customer, right? So whether you're a rider or you're an eater or you take a bike or scooter and so on, we just have like that one profile, which we are able to then allow you to have multiple experiences across our ecosystem of apps. So I think it's definitely one of our investment cases, and we are actually the largest food delivery service in the world outside of China. China is a separate thing altogether, so let's just qualify that. But outside of China, there is a claim to fame. So outside of China, we are the largest food delivery company in the world in terms of global footprint and the number of transactions we do. On the self-driving question, I think it's a great question. Like look, it's going to happen. It's going to take some time, right? A lot of people have different varying predictions in terms of it's going to happen in the next X years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever the case might be. But this is, again, an example of technology that continues. There are a lot of really smart people around the world who are working in this technology, and suddenly there'll be a step function, right? That's how most of the massive technology tectonic shifts happen, right? So I think it's going to happen, and at that point, I also feel that we are very uniquely positioned as a company to embrace that future, because I don't think that the technology is going to overnight, if you wake up in the morning, suddenly all the cars around you are self-driving. That's not going to happen. So it's going to be think of it as a network, and there'll be like a 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% evolution. And the most important thing for us at Uber is reliability, right? So if you are a rider and you push a button, and in some cases you'll get a self-driving car, and if you're not able to find a self-driving car which is customized to the route that you're taking, we'll send you a car with a human driver. So we will have a hybrid strategy for a while, and at some point, there'll be, as we're going through this, we'll figure out other ways to create new opportunities for a lot of people who are currently drivers.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that's a good place to transition back into like the questions that we had already prepared. So Uber's a public company now. Congratulations. And Juliana brought up a little bit about the economics of some of your businesses. And so I'd just like to know, most of the people here right now are working in the startup space, but I think ideally we'd like to get to public company stage. What's changed for you in the time you've been at Uber from private company to public company, and how do you see that impacting the work you do as Chief Product Officer?
Yeah, so for us, by the time we went public earlier this year, we were kind of almost operating like a public company for a few quarters. So we were publishing our quarterly reports, right? We were giving financial guidance and things like that. there was a lot of focus within the company to already prepare for that by doing a bunch of regulatory aspects that are needed to become a public company. So from that perspective, I don't think much has changed, right? So yeah, we are public, sure, but like, you know, on a day-to-day basis, not much has changed. At the same time, I feel that it's a very, very good thing that we went public, because it brings a very clear and open and transparent way to run the business, right? Like, you can't really hide, right? And you know, every quarter you got to publish your report, right? Every quarter, you know, you have investors, you have stakeholders, you have employees, your riders and drivers and everyone else. You just have to be very open as a public company, and you have to follow a lot of rigor. And I think there's a ton of value in being a public company, because it just brings that discipline, right? It brings that discipline, it brings the execution in the right way. So I'm seeing that happen a lot more, which I personally am very excited about. So that's one part. And as a product person, I think the important thing is it also allows me to start flexing a little bit more towards the long term, right? Because, you know, just so you folks know, like we raised almost $8.5 billion in the IPO, right? So we raised a lot of cash, and that cash is going to allow us to make bets where we need to, and also continue to invest for growth, you know, where needed. So I think we're in a good spot to be able to really start thinking about not only for the short term, like make sure that the business is working, but start making some of the longer term bets.
So certainly the capital influx that you get as part of going public is very positive for making long-term bets. But I think some people perceive of going public as something that now you have to answer on a quarterly basis, and maybe some of the things, like you can imagine on a shareholder call, somebody asking about the helicopter business and being like, is that really the investment area that we want to go into? So can you talk about how like the pressures of being a public company maybe impact your ability to do long-term product thinking, or maybe you really do think it's like mostly a positive force?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have just recently gone public, so I don't have a very strong point of view in terms of how this is going to pan out. In terms of, you know, that tension, I think you're right. Like there is probably going to be a tension in terms of, you know, showing lots of results on a quarterly basis, but at the same time making sure that we have long-term bets. I can just tell you that from my team's perspective and from my own perspective, I think we are pretty excited about having a good mix of things that are delivering for today, and also having a bunch of long-term bets. Because, you know, if you have to really become a platform and deliver on that mission and vision, you know, if you don't take the right set of bets and don't execute towards that, I don't think we'll be able to succeed in the long term. So I think it's great. We've got the financial backing, and we've got the transparency and the rigor and the execution, and I think that's a really good thing.
That's great. And so I want to go back a little bit to the Uber product. Again, a lot of us here are working on developing our own products, and I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but there's a certain line between, wow, this is extremely delightful, and the product is working in this way that I maybe didn't expect, and I did not expect it to know that about me. That's like deeply concerning. Can you explain from your view at like the highest possible level, the product level, how you think about balancing those trade-offs between we have all this data and we can use it in interesting ways, and also respecting user expectations and user privacy?
I think it's a really important point. You know, my personal belief, and this is what I continue to push my team on, is we have to give customers choice, right? And we not only do we have to give them choice, we also have to, if we are going to give them a set of controls for managing their privacy and the amount of data they want to give us, we have to make those controls things that are controls easy to understand. Oftentimes what ends up happening is people, in the name of choice, they give you like 25 different options, right? And then people are like, I don't really know what each of these options mean. So you have to make it you have to not only deliver on allowing people the choice, but also making sure that they can understand and make the right decisions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Today, you can, you know, if you use location data as an example, you can use the Uber app without turning on location. It's going to be painful, but you can do it, right? So it's not that we block you. So you'll have to find your pickup location. You'll have to find your destination. It will not automatically snap you to where you are because we don't have your location, but you can use it, right? At the same time, a few months ago, and it took us a little bit of time to get there. A few months ago, we started obscuring all the trip information about your pickup and drop off from the driver view, right? So after the driver has done the trip, then they go back to their trip history. They can't see the address, the pickup or drop off address anymore. So we are doing all these changes all the time to make sure that we are really safeguarding the user's privacy, and at the same time giving a bunch of knobs and whistles, if you will, for the user to decide what kind of experience they want, and that's the trade-off that they think about.
Yeah. So I think it's no secret that like one of the great things that made Uber possible in the beginning was that maybe it didn't have the best relationship with cities. It just sort of launched, and it was a case of permissionless innovation, to put it like in a positive context.
Thank you.
Yeah. That being said, you guys are a bigger company now, and one of the things you touched on was transit as something that you can now integrate into the Uber app. So I want to know, as this larger company now, I think it's pretty clear that Uber's no longer going for the permissionless innovation model. I think it seems like there's a lot of area there to work more closely with cities and municipalities. So can you talk a little bit about how you see those things working together, working with like local governments, state governments, to sort of transform mobility in cities?
Absolutely. Look, cities is a massive stakeholder for us. We talk about riders, we talk about drivers, let's say you talk about eaters, you talk about restaurants, but none of this would be possible without us working with the cities, right? So cities is definitely a really big and important stakeholder. And we are making progress on that front. We are in many discussions with different cities in terms of how we can help them plan, right? We have a product called Movement where we provide a bunch of data insights to cities with regards to speed limits, not speed limits, the actual traffic speeds, what are some of the dangerous intersections, if you will, based on all the data that we collect on a regular basis on our platform. So we have started building all these products and services for cities so that we can help them achieve their objectives. And at the same time, we are partnering a lot more with them around things like transit that I mentioned, and even bikes and scooters. How do we ensure that we reduce congestion? Our pool product is also a big part of reducing congestion. We recently launched in Egypt, in Cairo, we started launching buses. So these are 12-seater buses. So we're using our same technology of our pool technology. We are using that for coming up with a new bus system, which is more convenient and so on. And we are again partnering with the cities over there because again, congestion is a problem. They want to also allow a lot of people to come from like faraway places to the city center to work. So how do we enable that? So this is like a very important and constant dialogue that we're having with the cities on the policy front. And so far, I think we're making pretty good progress.
Yeah, so one more question on that front. I think Uber is in a unique position as such a large company now to sort of shape the future of what cities could look like. And so I'd like to know, from your point of view, what do you think the city of the future is going to look like from a mobility point of view? And I guess more specifically, how you would like to see the city of the future look, and so what you would do in your position to sort of make that change happen.
Wow. Okay, let's talk. No, so I think one way to think about this is you first define the problems and then you can think of the solutions. Almost at a meta level, if you look at all the migration patterns in the world right now, more and more people are moving to cities, right? And cities are essentially getting larger, right? In terms of number of people, in terms of development and so on. So while there was a time when if you look at America, there was a time when the automobile enabled suburbs, right? Because now people could live very far away from their work and then they could take the car and get back to work and so on. Now there is a very strong densification of cities happening, and this is not only a global phenomenon; it's happening even in the U.S. I mean, look at San Francisco, right? A lot of people want to move in here. So now with that, what happens is suddenly you are in a situation where congestion becomes a problem, right? So you have a lot of cars, you have a lot of people who want to get from point A to point B, and it gets really, really hard. A lot of cities around the world have also not really invested very heavily in public transit, right? So you don't have effective ways to move around the city. So if you think about this problem space, I think the city of the future from my perspective is kind of the vision that I was painting with the platform, which is we want to have a tremendous set of options from a transportation standpoint for every user in every city. And then we want the user to make the choice based on what's convenient for them, right? So I would love for us in the future to have 20 different options of different types of scooters, bikes, cars, pooled cars, buses, you want to take a plane, flying car, you can do that too, right? So that's sort of the way in which we will have to evolve. You want to also be able to do multimodal. So you want to essentially go from your home, you want to take a jump scooter to a Caltrain station, take a Caltrain, and then or the Muni, and then you want to get out somewhere where there's either a car waiting for you or you can pick up something else. So I think we will have to very closely partner with the cities to develop that point of view. And then more and more as parking becomes a problem, when self-driving cars come in, as parking becomes a problem in these cities, you can imagine that a lot of the cars that will bring people into cities, those same cars will not even have to park in the city. So can you imagine if you didn't really have to park cars in the city? That opens up a lot of space too, right? And then people can kind of move around, they can walk and so on and so forth. So I think that's sort of the vision, which is provide a lot of different options. Some of those options we will build ourselves. Some of the options we'll partner with other really, really good providers who are really creatively thinking about this. But at the same time, really focus on reducing congestion, really helping the users reduce the stress in their lives, and just make it easy for them to get around from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I think, I'd like to open it back up to the audience for more questions, but I did have one final topic that I sort of wanted to touch on, which is accessibility. So now that, again, Uber has really become like one of the largest, most powerful tech companies in the world, we can expect that you want billions of users on your platform. And for that to happen, you have to accommodate like so many possible different varieties of ability, disability. So I want to know how you think of accessibility as it pertains to the Uber product, and then, as the Chief Product Officer, what are the sort of things that you can do to make sure that the product not only stays accessible, but perhaps becomes more accessible?
Yeah. So the way I think about accessibility, I think it's a spectrum, right? So on one end, one of the core ways in which Uber has continued to solve a lot of problems for our users is by reducing prices. So think about accessibility from an affordability standpoint first, and I'll get to the other points as well. So if you think about it, today we are in, like I was saying earlier, we are in about 60 countries. And in those 60 countries itself, if you look at the entire market size of the market with regards to all the passenger miles that are traveled in each of these countries, and you add them up, that's about a $2.5 trillion market, right? And we are at close to about $50 billion right now in our gross bookings. So you can see there's a big gap over there. And we are not going to be able to go from where we are right now to capture that market unless and until we figure out a way to start really effectively lowering the prices of our riders, right? And the way you do that is you do products like the bus that I was telling you about, right? You also make pool work better so that we can always, get more efficiency in the system and pass the prices down. So that way it will allow us to get the next billion users into the network, and then they can kind of get the same level of service that everybody else enjoys in many parts of the world. And then there is the other dimension of accessibility, which is around disabilities and so on. So we have a very strong product. You can actually request a wheelchair accessible vehicle on Uber today, right? And it's a separate option that's available in some markets. And we have done a lot of work to work with these drivers to make their vehicles accessible to wheelchairs. And that's been a very interesting product that we have launched, and we'll continue to do more towards that. We have also we pushed really hard, and I'm really happy to say that as women started driving in Saudi Arabia for the first time, we have women drivers in Saudi Arabia, right? And that's an incredible thing. Like, women couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia, and now they can, and a lot of them are actually women drivers who are also taking other women to where they need to go, right? So we are kind of looking at all these aspects as a global company. We have a very large footprint, so we look at this very holistically. And in terms of how I personally think about it, you are absolutely right. As we increase the number of users and the types of needs that they have on our platform, we will have to build products and features that serve their needs in a unique manner. Otherwise, we are just going to disappoint those users. So this is a constant endeavor, and we'll continue to push on that.
Thanks so much for coming. I wanted to kind of ask kind of a two-part question that I'll try to keep short around both the business priorities and metrics that don't necessarily affect business priorities directly. So the first question is going to be about efficiency of transit. Even if there's buses and lots of slightly higher density options, at the end of the day, that isn't still the same density as real urban rail or subway systems, and especially as cities depend on that sort of transit revenue. And I would have to believe that Uber cuts into that revenue somewhat. How is that ultimate vision of having a really cost-effective ride going to work unless you're able to work with cities to finance those systems? And on the other side, as a product leader, you have to drive not only to the things that are going to affect the business, like efficiency, but also onto those points of safety. So when you're actually going through planning, how do you weigh the metrics that will directly affect revenue versus metrics that will affect customer experience, for which you may not see differences, you may not see a change in surveys until far down the road, and so you kind of have to do things now because you think they're the right thing, but can't necessarily test them versus the business objectives.
Yeah. So at a meta level, I would say I don't think we do a very good job on that right now. I think it's a really hard problem to really have a perfect allocation of your resources working on the here and now and also the future. But we do use some shorthands. And this is something, by the way, this framework I use at Google as well, which was very effective. At least I thought it was a good way to think about it. So it's a 70-20-10, right? So 70% of your resources should really be focused on what's going to drive the core business right now, like over the next, let's say, 6 to 9 months or 6 to 12 months. 20% of your resources should be 12 to 18 months, and then 10% is probably 2 years and beyond, right? And if you do it that way, you get to a point where you have the right set of portfolio of bets that allow you to really focus on your business right now. And at the same time, out of the 10%, like maybe 50% of them will fail. And that's okay, right? Because it's only 10%. So you didn't really lose much when you fail. The important thing in those 10% is you need to fail fast. Because if you don't fail fast, then that 10% can kind of just be a drag on the rest of the organization. So that's sort of the way we have been sort of codifying it. It's not perfect, but at least it sort of works for us. So that's the reason why you had products like the high capacity vehicles, the buses that I was telling you about that we're running, that came about from there. When we first came up with our scooter and bike business, that came out of the 10% as well, right? So we did some experiments and we got some product market fit, and then we went. I'm not going to tell you the failures, but that's okay, right? So my point is that's how we think about it. And I think to answer your question on transit, that's exactly the reason why we are doing it, which is ultimately, if we get to a point where we can have a lot of cars, Uber cars everywhere, but they can't move because of congestion, I think we all lose, right? We lose for sure, right? So it's important for us to really figure out a way to load balance, right? The way people are moving around, and that's the reason why we are starting to show options like transit on which we don't make any money, right? You can just click on transit and you just go and you figure this out. At some point when we start doing multimodal, then it will make it more effective because we can give the entire end-to-end transaction to you. So that's how we're thinking about it. It's early days, but I think you will see us making a lot of those kind of moves to really help provide the users a choice and in effect really help our business as well.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for coming. My question is around experimentation. So you talked a little bit about how you run thousands of experiments at any given time. And I was wondering, first of all, kind of what's your overall philosophy when deciding how to weigh different potential experiments and how to decide which ones can actually be run? And then also, how do you think about making sure that you are able to do lots of experiments at once that are often crossing through different dimensions but that don't interfere with each other?
Yeah. So I think broadly I would say there are kind of 3 separate sets of experiments that we do, and each of them has a different degree of complexity and a lot of care that you need to put into do the experiment design. So the easiest and the most frequent experiments we do are just string changes in the apps or on our websites. Like those are the easiest to test, and believe me, if you folks haven't done this, please do those kind of experiments. It's unbelievable how much lift you can get in your metrics just by changing the strings a little bit here and there, right? And you can design the perfect product and you're like, I've got it. And then you will do that, and then somebody will provide a different string or so on, and then you test it, and suddenly the users like that a lot more, right? So that's the easiest one, and I think we can run many of them. We have the luxury of a pretty large user base, so we can kind of cohort it appropriately. And we also have the luxury of being in 600 cities, so we can choose some of the cities to be more aggressive, less aggressive, and so on. So that's one. The second the second set of experiments we do are around interactions. So in the mobile UI, like, where do you place the button? How does the interaction happen from one screen to the other screen? Those are a little bit harder because they require some coding and they require, you have to set the cohorts right and so on, but we do a bunch of that. And the third ones, which are the most complicated and they require a lot of, very careful design, are what we call the marketplace experiments. These are where let's say we make a pricing change, right? Or we do a change in our matching algorithm, right? So that we have to be very careful because that can imbalance the rest of the marketplace. So you can't really do a clean A/B test in that, because if you do that, because you have taken, let's say you took supply from 80% of people and put them in the 20%, those 80% are going to suffer pretty dramatically. So then you can't really tease out what really happened. So those are the ones that we do a little bit more thoughtfully, and we have the right framework for that. In terms of collisions, they happen all the time, right? So that's why on the string side, it's okay. The collisions are not that complicated, but on the marketplace one, we have to plan more in advance so that we can choose certain cities. And in those cities, we do what we call a switchback experiment, where every 10 minutes or 20 minutes, we actually launch the feature, unlaunch the feature, launch the feature, unlaunch the feature. So we do that. We have developed a pretty sophisticated way to do that right now. So that way, at least it doesn't impact the overall marketplace health, but at the same time gets us a signal that we need, but it has to run for maybe a month or so, right? So that's the broad spectrum of experimentation that we do.
Okay. Yeah. As you all go from the 50 billion market to capturing the 2 trillion market, how does Uber see your role in impacting climate change and decreasing the carbon footprint? Do you measure it, and what's the strategy to bring that number down?
Yeah, so this is an area where we are actively looking into, right? We already do a bunch of stuff today. For instance, we have partnered with in London, we have done a bunch of work on electric vehicles, right? And how do we get EVs on our platform? And we are constantly evaluating ways in which we can really reduce our overall, not only measure, but reduce our overall footprint. Nothing to announce right now, but that's definitely an area, because we are getting to a point where we have to be very thoughtful about that. And there are a bunch of interesting efforts that are in flight, but I can't really share more than that right now. Yeah.
Great. Maybe see some hands up there.
Hi, thanks for sharing. I'm sure that the whole Me Too episode, the blog posts, have definitely changed the culture internally for Uber. I'm wondering whether that has changed product thinking, how you design, launch products. In general, I'm wondering whether there are key product decisions a startup can make early on that will foster a positive culture internally.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there are product decisions that get impacted or that can sort of design or drive the culture aspect. But what I would say though is, it's more about inclusion, right? And I think connecting back to the question he was asking about accessibility and like thinking broadly about your customers, you just sort of imbibe that thinking as a leader by making sure that what you do at work is what you also want for your users. Right? So that's the connection that I feel that a lot of people are able to internalize and able to drive. And I think, look, 2017 was a tough year for us, for sure. And I think we have done a tremendous amount of work to come around of that. And Dara, our CEO, he joined a couple of years ago, and he's just been an incredible agent of change for us. He has come in, one of his key tenets that he put there, and maybe that's actually a good way to think about the product aspect, which is, he said that when in doubt, always do the right thing. It's so simple, right? And it just becomes such an important thing in the company that whenever we are making decisions around product, like we can go this way versus that way, there'll be somebody in the room who'll say, hey, are we doing the right thing? Let's always do the right thing. And it just allows the conversation to move forward in a much positive direction. So I think those are some of the aspects that I would talk about from a culture standpoint.
That's great. Maybe, yeah, I feel like I've been incredibly biased towards the left side of the room, or my left side.
Thank you so much. My question is, if Uber were to become a global utility, what type of regulations would you welcome? I know it's kind of a trick question, right?
I mean, look, this goes back to the fact that we work very closely with many cities already at this point. And a lot of cities are increasingly asking us for data, right, from a compliance standpoint in terms of trip data, usage data, and so on. And we are actively sharing that information with them. And then they evaluate that not only from us, they evaluate that from some of our competitors and so on. And then they provide us feedback in terms of how we can improve and so on. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation, and I think the important thing that we have to all think about is what is the future that we want, right, with regards to what the future of the cities is, and how we can really solve together with the cities and other stakeholders, how we can solve these problems over the longer term. And so I feel pretty positive and optimistic about how our partnership is going to pan out in that space. Yeah.
That's great. And then maybe, Ruthia. This is, I think, going to have to be the last one, just for everyone.
I actually have 2 questions.
Oh my God. Okay.
You do 2 quick ones.
That's okay. That's okay.
Pick your favorite.
Yeah.
Or least.
Yeah, the first one is I think for a business like Uber, competition is always a thing, right? So when a user chooses to call a car, there may not be huge difference between like different platforms, and also for drivers, sometimes they do both. I want to know like how the competition may influence like the product direction. And the second question is in terms of the offline and online experience. So I work at Facebook, and people may spend like 15 minutes on Facebook just browsing stuffs. But for Uber, maybe a user also spent 50 minutes, but maybe just 2 minutes on app, and then like the 48 minutes are offline. So how do you weigh the online and offline experience?
So I'm going to ask you a clarification about the second question, but so what do you when you say online to off?
Like
Yeah.
when I say online, it's more like in-app. So when they use the app, and the offline is like when they are in the trip, or like, I think that's. How do you weigh like the different experience in terms of like the product thing?
No, absolutely. So on the first question on competition, so I think competition is great because it's great for the customer and keeps us on our toes, right? And in general, if I look at our rides business, which is our main core business, we are the number one in terms of category position, right? Globally in every market that we operate, right? So, but at the same time, in many markets, we have very strong competition, right? Which is good. So the way it infuses into product thinking is keep an eye on the competition, but focus on the customer, right? So you can't do one versus the other. You have to do both, because the reason why I say that is especially because the area that we are operating in is so rapidly evolving, and there's tremendous amount of capital that's going into this market. We keep thinking about like at some point there's going to be rationalization, but no, there's no rationalization. There's enough capital going into ride hailing, there's enough capital going into food delivery and so on. So we just have to keep a very close eye on competition. But ultimately, I fundamentally believe that once you build a better product, which is more reliable, more personalized, it has a better network, it works for you globally, I think that product will win, right? So that's the way we think about from a day-to-day basis on competition. I think in terms of the online and offline, the way I think about this is it is totally fine if people book an Uber and they get into the car and they never want to see the Uber app again. That's okay. That's fine, because we have served the purpose, right? And once in a while, if they open the Uber app and they see where their route is and what's the ETA, they can do that. So we don't have any intention to capture the attention of users outside of what our core service is providing. So that's what we focus on.
Yeah. That's amazing, and I think that's a great way to end it. So Manik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.